Okay, making a video on working on creating better tightness in the bench press. I've said a billion times now, and I will continue saying 90% of bench technical proficiency is just learning to get tighter and tighter. I'd say it's a pretty unique lift in that way, and one of the best pieces of advice I got was if you're comfortable while in your bench position, you're probably doing it wrong. So just a couple of like what I think are the core points of improving, right? And I think that regardless of how advanced you are, these are things you can do better. I work on them every day. If you think your bench is dialed in and doesn't have anything to work on, you're probably delusional or you're very good. So I would say roughly order of importance, all I can say is the first and most important one is back tightness, right? And when I think about back tightness in the bench press, I believe there are three elements, right? You're going to have your scapular retraction, so that's back. You're going to have your scapular depression, which is down, and then there's also some degree of a pull apart motion, right? So kind of going through this, I usually think when I'm setting up on the bench, I'm going to set my scaps back, draw them down. I'm going to have to give up a little bit of that retraction to achieve a good level of depression. And as I do that, that'll pull me into my arch. And really cranking your lats downward is what's going to maintain your arch and create that arch from the T-spine rather than from the lumbar spine, because lumbar arch doesn't really do much for us. We're really looking for that T-spine arch. Make the pressing angle more downward. A little easier on the shoulder. That's what's going to reduce the lumbar arch. All it's going to do is raise the height of your belly and make it more difficult to transfer leg drive into the bar. So those are the first two things, and then the third one that I think is really missed out upon is that slight pull apart. I don't cue it as actively as I do the other two. I really just crank my scaps back and down. The pull apart is more passive. The way I explain it to a lot of people is if your hands were sweaty, they would slowly slide apart on the bar. It's not that you're trying to rip it apart, because I think that people lose focus on the more important first two cues when they do that. But having that slight pull apart pressure is going to help you use your rear delts to further stabilize the bench, and it's also going to help you flare to a natural degree because you don't want to overtuck. All that's going to do is underutilize your pecs in your bench press. And one drill that I find very helpful to do in between benches to help with that back tightness element is I take a band, I put my hands about yay width, I pull it to my bench grip, I think back, I think down, and then I press it without letting my hands come in or out at the bottom. And that, you'll feel, is the kind of bench like back tension you want to duplicate at the bottom of your bench. You don't want, so when you're taking a band, you go apart, you think back, you think down, you raise, and you're going to want to like come out or in or move your hands in some way. You're going to keep that tight, and that feeling in your back is what you're going to try to strive to duplicate during your pause on the bench. A lot of people really just lose that when their elbows come out, their elbows come in, the weight just sinks into them, right? You're not keeping that same level of back tension as you would with that band. So doing that between each set of bench, I found to be very helpful. The second part is usually tension at the hips. The simplest thing I've always said is, don't fully set your ass on the bench. Really just you're like hovering it on there. You want to fiddle with your foot position until you're at a point where your hip is in maximal extension, right? That way if you go to drive with your legs and extend at your knee for leg drive, your hips aren't going to be able to rise because they're already fully in extension. That can mean wide, that can be far back, that can be forward. Anything that's going to put you in full extension is going to be the move, right? You're going to flex your glutes, kind of protect your low back, also further put your hips into extension. But any foot position that's going to put your hips all the way into extension so that you can aggressively leg drive without it being an illegal bench press is going to be good. I like to advocate some form of lateral stability at the hip as well. So for some people that might look like pushing your knees out as hard as you can, just like a maximal contraction of your glutes. And for some people that might look like squeezing the bench between your knees with your adductors. I find both to be equally effective for different people. It's just like, because you have that flexion extension, like stability just by tossing it at end range, fully extending your hip, I usually just say, let's just toss our hip at full range, adduction, abduction, whatever you prefer. Right, so that's going to be the second portion, is really having that tension through your lower body. You might catch some hip cramps initially, but like anything else, you build a tolerance to the position. Those happen less and less frequency. So you have the upper back tension. And the three things we cue: we are putting our hips into extension. Our ass is not fully sitting on the bench; it's hovering on it. Hips are fully extended. That way, we can extend at the knee to transfer leg drive into the bar without it becoming an illegal bench. We're going to stabilize the hips laterally in whichever way you prefer. And then the last thing that I think is is very slept on. You can do a very good bench without doing it. I just don't understand why you would. Is for some reason people get like a maximally sized breath of air before they deadlift and before they squat, but they don't before they bench. That for me is a huge make or break for how powerful my pressing is for the day. Before I swing into place on my bench setup, I take in as much air as I possibly can, because the way I think about it is the bench for powerlifting is a whole body motion. When I'm extending at my knees to create leg drive, I'm trying to transfer that in the bar. That means that force has to go through my midsection. And if I'm transferring force through my midsection, I would like it to be braced. Otherwise, I think it's going to be, some of the force is going to be lost. The easiest thing for me to do is just take as much air as I possibly can in before I set up and before I unrack it. And I won't blow that air out for as many reps. If I'm doing a single, air's not leaving until I'm done with the single. If I'm doing a triple, I will try to do the triple all in that first breath. If I'm doing a real rep out set, I'll do as many as I can in that first breath, and I'll do one reset. Because you'll see visibly in a lot of people's benches, when they start breathing, they're going to lose their tension. They're not going to get it back. It's just such a struggle. And the more and more maximal that weight is, the more you breathe. Like, there is some loss of tension there that you can't get back and you can't maintain while breathing. So that kind of leads me to the conclusion, okay, well, don't breathe if you can.